Elevate, how you guys doing this morning? And it's a good day to be here. It's a good day to worship. It's a good day to study a little bit. We are actually ending our series today, Finding Your Way. But before we do that, I want to direct your attention to the screen with the QR code where you can find all the information about our church. You can follow along with our sermon today. If you're new, there's an I'm New tab. If you go ahead and just do that, there'll be a gift waiting for you outside of the lobby here. It's a nice Elevate mug, which I so desperately need every single morning to make sure, one, that I drink coffee, and two, that I continue to pray for our church every single day. But today we are coming to what seems as a conclusion or a closing of the old and refocusing to the new. In this story, the Israelites are coming off a very, very hard loss to Ai. We talked about that last week. They lost because God had removed the blessing of the people because the Israelites did not follow the covenant of God. If you remember last week, they realized that something was off, and they went to God, and God said, "Somebody in your camp is sinning." They did not follow the command that I had given them, so what they did is they asked everybody what had happened, and somebody came forward, Achan came forward and said, "I have sinned against God. I have sinned against God." So they brought it to God. And God said, remove everything. Remove all of the sin and just get rid of it. So it's time, after they remove the sin, we're at the second part of this battle. It's time to face Ai again. But they have a new plan this time. This time, they came up with a strategy to defeat Ai. The last time, if you remember, they just thought, man, it's a very small town, we'll just send 3,000 people, and they went straight at the city, and they were defeated. They immediately realized we are outnumbered, we don't know what we're doing, and they turned and they ran away, and then they were pinned because Ai had a plan. But this time, they said, we're going to do the first part the same. We're going to send half the people. We're going to go straight at the city of Ai. And then when the people come out, the second half of our people are going to go around the city and enter through the back gates. So it says that the Israelites sent the people towards Ai, and when they saw the people come out of the city, every single man from Ai left the city to attack the Israelites. The people of Ai are like, we've seen this before. We know exactly what they're going to do. They're going to go straight at us, and we're just going to chase them away again. But little did they know the Israelites went around the back, and they went straight into the city. And right when they took the city, when they defeated the city, they went through the front gates towards the people of Ai that were running towards the Israelites that were running away. And as soon as the Israelites realized they took the city, the Israelites turned around and faced Ai, and Israelites sandwiched them in the quarry, and they ended up defeating Ai in this battle. It was a great victory for the people of Israelites because they felt like they're back on top again. They're like, who can stand against us? We have God on our side. We can just continue to do this over and over and over again. If we just follow God and we follow His commandments, no one can defeat us. Absolutely no one can defeat us. When we're on our path towards God, and we're at this exact same stage, we're coming off something that was probably a little bit of defeat, but God came through, and we feel like we're right next to God. We feel like our heartbeats are in sync with each other. We feel like we're on the same brainwave as God, and we ask the question, how can we make sure we never get off of this path towards God? How in the world can we make sure that we have this full dedication towards God? We have no fear, we have no doubt. How can we make sure we rely on this understanding that God is with us and we can conquer anything instead of what we were before? How can we make sure we stay on this path towards God? It reminds me of a group of seniors who just finished their last football game of the season. And they realized that they weren't going to ever play on this field ever again. So at this point of their football career, they realized, man, we are the fastest we've ever been. We are the strongest we've ever been. We've never been closer as a team than we've ever been, and it's all coming to an end right today. So they decided after they were done getting changed, after they showered, they decided that they were going to go leave their locker room and go to the front lobby where all of the greats photos were plastered around the lobby of the gym. There was people that had been All-Americans. There were teams that had won All-State and won All-Conference and All-Region. There were different players that they had played with over the years that have won conference stuff, that had been All-State, and maybe even some of them had been All-American. And then they started looking around and they realized that some of us around had been playing since 7th grade together. They had been playing for 6-7 years together, and it was all coming to an end at this moment. And as they looked around at the all-time greats and the different teams that they'd played with over the years, with many, many tears, one guy said, "Hey," and pointed at a photo and said, "Hey, you remember when Jason won the game-winning touchdown, and he was so excited that he wanted to chest bump one of the linemen, and he just fell right on his butt?" And then another guy said, "Oh yeah, you remember the time when the kicker tried to go in for a field goal and kick the ball and hit the referee right in the face? Man, that was hilarious." And over time, they started sharing story after story after story, and through tears and laughter, the people who had not been playing with them for the past 7 years, maybe people that had just started playing the past 2 years, felt like they had relived and lived all of those stories of those people. And after 30 minutes, they realized at this moment that they need to make sure that they remember these stories forever. Not only that, they need to remember where they started and where they finished. They need to make sure that they remember where they started, where they were just these little bitty 6th graders and 7th graders. And at the end of 6 long years, they realized that they were so close as a family. See, after the Israelites finished their battle of Ai and Bethel, Joshua did something that Moses, the person who taught him so much, encouraged him to do after every single battle. He commanded the Israelites to do something when God moved in a certain situation. And that's where our story picks up today in Joshua 8. So Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what was written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on a stone a copy of the law of Moses. All of the Israelites, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the ark of the covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when they gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. See, Israel is coming off a great victory, and they decided to make sure, which had never been done in their generation before, to make sure that they stop and they look around. See, I think in our life today, we often miss this opportunity to stop. Whenever I was younger and I was a part of the church, I thought the church moved at snail speed. Man, I thought that paint on a wall could dry faster than some of the decisions that churches could make on a daily basis. In my staff, I often make the joke, whenever you're making decisions, whenever you're planning something, make sure you don't run at the speed of church, because that is way too slow. Now, after working in the church for 7 years, I do often understand why churches take so long to make decisions, but I think we're missing the formula that God had placed in this story. What I think we need to do is be a group of people passionately going after a community to reach a goal that whatever is up against whenever we're up against a wall, we just need to go after this community and love on this community. We never need to stop. We never need to slow down. We just need to go after this community and just love on the people that are surrounding us. But whenever God moves in a moment, we need to make sure that we stop and we recognize when God moves in this moment. We need to make sure that we never, ever miss when God is on our side. So the Israelites stopped and built an altar and a landmark at a place where God moved and was faithful in their life. It says that they made sacrifices and a sacrifice of fellowship. See, other interpretations would say that this is a peace offering to God. An offering saying, God, I want to thank you so much for being faithful and staying faithful in my life. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to give an offering to say, God, you have been faithful and I want to thank you. I believe this is a missed process in our life. The reason is because how many of us get frustrated when things get difficult in our life? How many of us immediately start blaming other people, maybe start blaming God or blaming the situation when something super difficult happens in our life? How often does God come through over and over and over again, but it just takes one bad week to feel like we're so distant from what God is calling us to do? It doesn't matter how many times there's enough money in the bank account. It doesn't matter how many times He's come through with your job, relationships. It doesn't matter how many times He's given you peace in a certain situation. All of it can be lost in an instant if we never stop and recognize when God moves in our life so that we can point back to where God was faithful and remember that moment. See, the second thing that we always need to do after we stop is we need to remember the times when God moved in our life. We need to remember the times when God was faithful in these different situations as we go through life. In Joshua 8:34-35, in the continuation of our story, it says this: Afterwards, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it was written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. For the very first time since God gave Moses the law, this was the very first time it has ever been read out loud to all of the people. And we need to understand at this point, these people that are going into the promised land, they were not the ones that were given the law. It was their parents, the generation before them, that passed away before they entered the promised land, that was given this law. So up to this point, all the information that has been passed down from generation to generation has just been taught from parent to kin. Never in their lifetime had they all sat around and just listened to what God gave Moses so many years ago. See, heritage brings people together, and I think you guys know that. Understanding where family comes from being places together, from understanding where your family maybe came across, maybe you're part of an immigrant family, maybe your family's been here for a very long time. If you ever meet somebody that has the same heritage as you, you immediately find common ground. This is something that's built into our DNA. Everybody does this. If you look at our history of the United States, you can see a group of people that have wrestled together and struggled together and fought against each other to where we are today. And even as being a Kentuckian, which I've lived here for a very long time, you don't realize how important other Kentuckians are until you leave the state. I remember when I was, I think I was 13 years old, we would go and visit my grandmother. She lives in Colorado, and I was super bored in Colorado all the time because we'd go up to a mountain. There's no service. I can't call anybody. There's no internet reception. It's just a bunch of older people and then me as one or two grandkids just trying to figure out what to do. We can go outside, but if we go too far, it's really dangerous because there can be snow that falls down the mountain. There's bears, there's elk, there's tons of just dangerous things. We can't start a fire because we could burn the whole nation down, apparently. So there's nothing to do as a 13-year-old. That's what I feel like. So my parents would drop me off down at the lodge, and I would just ski or snowboard all day. And I really, really enjoyed that. And one time they were running late for something, so they just dropped me off. They gave me the credit card and said, you know what to do, just buy what you need to, and call us on the phone whenever you're done snowboarding. And I go up to the person who is standing at the counter, and they ask, okay, what do you need? I give them my boot size, and they hear that I have a slight accent in my voice. They're like, "Where are you from?" I say, "Well, I'm from Kentucky. I live in Lexington." And they're like, "Lexington?" I was like, "Well, if you've ever heard the University of Kentucky, it's in that town." And it was a super confused look on this person's face. And they lean over the counter and look at my feet, and they say, "You have shoes on." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Of course I have shoes on." And this person, I hear a voice behind me, and the person says, "You said I can't do this, super country accent. You're from Kentucky?" And I said, "I am from Kentucky." And it's like, "Kentucky's the best place to live, isn't it?" And I said, "Amen, it is the best place." But in that moment, I never felt so secure in myself than that moment when somebody verified the fact that Kentucky is a good place. Never in a moment did I ever find common ground when you are out in an island by yourself and you find the one thing that you find in common with somebody, and you just grab a hold of that because it is built in our DNA to find common ground with other people. I believe humans can find common ground with absolutely anything. This is football season. We have entire football stadiums that are filled up every single week. We have people, you can go to a restaurant and you can see somebody with the same ball cap as you, and you can immediately strike up a conversation about something because you know that you root for the same team. We have entire venues booked up with music. We have entire art shows. We have book clubs where hundreds and thousands and millions of people are reading the exact same book at the same time. And if you find somebody that's read that same book, like if you're on an airplane, you immediately know what to talk about because you have something in common. See, remembering where you came from, remembering your heritage, and remembering what you know immediately draws you closer to the people around you. Remembering in a community brings you closer to the community every single time. To this day, the church still recalls the time of the Old Testament and New Testament. We do it every single Sunday morning. We quote theologians that have great insight to God, and these things we are accustomed to every single Sunday when we gather together. Even though we find accustomed to recalling the things of Scripture, how often do we recall things of the people that we're sitting to our left and to our right with? See, us as individuals, I think, struggle with the idea of sharing moments where God moved in our life. We share the times, we forget to share the times where we were sick and God healed us. And we forget to share the great times when if you are in a hospital and God and your church takes care of your house and everything in it. We forget about the times where we felt like we were making less money than the bills, but for some reason there's always enough money in the bank account to pay for everything. We forget to share the times when people were dealing with infertility and God provided a child. We forget to tell each other and share with each other the times when we were really dealing with something really hard, and God gave us people that surrounded us and loved us during that time. See, we forget to share those stories with each other. And because of that, we forget immediately when God was faithful in our life. We need to share our stories with each other because if we share the stories with each other, we will immediately remember. We'll immediately remember where God moved in our life so that we never fall off the track towards God. See, the third thing we need to do, we need to make sure that we do, is we need to share stories with each other. I can only imagine what it was like in that moment when Joshua took out the scriptures of the law and gathered everybody around him and just shared the stories that he experienced and the things that Moses shared with him in that moment. I can only imagine the amount of light bulbs that went off on these people's heads where where Joshua read these stories over and over again, and they're like, "I remember when my parents told me that story." I can only imagine that when Joshua told the story about when he went to the Promised Land the first time and it didn't work, where he wanted to stay faithful and he wanted to go into the Promised Land, but everybody else said, "No, we're not going to do it." And then 40 years later, he's back at that point, and he's like, look, we just went for it because we knew God was on our side. But what does that look like if that happened this time around? What do you think would happen? What do you think it would look like if us today, post-Jesus, got around each other and shared this picture? See, I think we have this picture slightly in Acts 2:42 through 47. I'm going to ask the band to come back up in this moment. Say that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together, and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had a need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favors of all the people. And the Lord added to their numbers daily. See, I think that we can get a clear picture of how that it was experienced in that day. See, there's a picture of that where the apostles are all probably gathered around a table, and they're all reclining, and then there's just hundreds, maybe even thousands of people that are just surrounding them. And you just hear the apostles sharing back and forth about the stories of when Jesus was with them. And you hear about, you remember when Jesus called me? You remember when he said, hey, just come and see what I'm all about? And I had so many doubts. And I can think about the different apostles kind of hurting each other, where it's like, hey, you remember when Peter cut off that guy's ear? And Peter's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody brought that up. And he goes, yeah, you remember when Jesus picked up that bloody ear and stuck it back on that guy's face? Man, that was crazy. Hey, you remember when Peter denied Jesus 3 times? And Peter's like, guys, okay, I get it, I messed up. And all the people around are just in awe of the signs and wonders that the apostles did, where they're just sharing stories about, hey, you remember when Jesus was walking through that crowd of people and he just felt the presence of that lady? I don't even understand how he even felt that. There's thousands of people around. And he turned around and he healed that lady. And then just a few seconds later, he goes to another town over and he heals another kid. Man, that was crazy. See, every time we are on the edge of our seats and we're just listening to the stories of each other, it is so important to listen, because it's not about us in that moment. It's about remembering and pointing people back to Jesus when they need it. When the apostles gathered everybody around, I can only imagine the very first time they shared the story of Jesus with everybody. When they shared that there was one point in our life when we did not have a relationship with God. There was a point in our life where we were struggling so hard and we just wanted that fellowship so bad, and God recognized that we did, and so did He. So He brought Jesus down, His Son, to give us some incredible teaching, to guide us in the direction towards Him. But in the perfect moment of history when it needed it the most, He sent His Son to die on the cross for us. And He did that because He wanted a relationship with us, and sin was that barrier. So 3 days later, He rose again. And He promised us that at this moment, when He goes back to heaven, He's going to prepare a place for us so that we can have fellowship with our Creator forever. He encouraged His people to do one thing every time He got together. He encouraged His people to come together and eat, but eat in a specific way. He said, why don't you take the bread every time you come together and remember my body that was broken for you. And he said, while you're doing that, why don't you grab the wine as we take juice? And remember my blood that was shed for you, so that every time you come together as a body of believers, every time you come together as a family, you will remember that I have been faithful for all of eternity, and there's no reason to believe that the next time you are struggling, that I'm going to come through and be faithful as well. So before we continue in worship today, we're going to take communion together. We're going to take the bread, which represents Jesus' body broken for us, and we're going to take the juice, which represents Jesus' blood shed for us, to remember the greatest gift that was ever given to us, so that we can remember every single time that Jesus has been faithful, God has been faithful since the beginning. That when he said he's going to redeem his creation, he did it on that day at the cross. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you so much for the story of the Israelites, where they got around your table and they just recalled your law. And all in a moment, they were on the same page because they were all trying to remember you and the faithfulness that you did for them over and over and over again. And just like that, I can only picture the apostles standing around, encouraging people to eat the bread and eat the juice, because we need to remember your Son every single week so that we are all on the same page, so that we can encourage each other to make sure and encourage each other to say, hey, look, God was faithful then, and he is going to be faithful now for generations to come. God, you are so good. I'm going to ask this all in your Son's name. Amen.